January 17th, 1942. Southwest Pacific. The morning air hangs thick and wet over the volcanic soil of New Britain. A young Japanese lieutenant named Takashi Yamamoto stands at the edge of a newly captured airfield, still smoldering from the Allied evacuation 3 days prior. The acrid smell of burnt rubber and aviation fuel mingles with the sweet rot of jungle vegetation. His boots, already splitting at the seams after 2 months of island warfare, press in a mud that never seems to dry. He has been told this airfield, this island, this entire ocean will belong to the Empire within 6 months. He believes it. They all believe it. Around him, soldiers from the South Seas Detachment rifle through abandoned barracks, laughing as they discover cases of canned peaches, cartons of American cigarettes, chocolate bars still wrapped in bright foil that catches the equatorial sun. One soldier holds up a single can of Coca-Cola like a trophy, the glass bottle impossibly intact, beads of condensation forming in the heat. Yamamoto watches this scene with satisfaction. These are the spoils of a warrior race, he thinks. These are the crumbs left behind by a soft, decadent enemy already in retreat. What he does not yet understand, what none of them can yet comprehend, is that these crumbs are not evidence of American weakness. They are the first whisper of something far more terrifying, a glimpse into the sheer, incomprehensible scale of American industrial power. A power so vast that it considers canned peaches and glass-bottled soda expendable luxuries for frontline soldiers. A power that will, in less than 4 years, drown the Japanese Empire in steel and fire. But on this January morning, Yamamoto does not know this. None of them do. They have been taught since childhood that Japan is the land of the gods, that the emperor is divine, that the Yamato spirit, the indomitable soul of the warrior, can overcome any material disadvantage. They have swept through Malaya, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies with a speed and ferocity that stun the world. In their minds, America is a nation of shopkeepers and Hollywood actors, grown fat on luxury, incapable of the sacrifice and discipline that war demands. They have been told the Americans love comfort more than honor, that they will negotiate, that they will tire, that they will break. They are catastrophically, tragically wrong. The education of the Japanese soldier, the brutal unraveling of everything he has been told to believe, begins not with a single battle, but with 10,000 small revelations. It begins with the things they find in captured American positions. It begins with the supplies that wash ashore from sunken transports. It begins with the prisoners they take and the questions they ask. And slowly, like a man waking from a dream into a nightmare, the Japanese military begins to understand the nature of the enemy they have provoked. In the early months of 1942, as Japanese forces consolidate their conquests across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, a strange cognitive dissonance settles over the frontline units. They are winning. They are victorious. And yet, the evidence accumulating around them does not match the narrative they have been fed. On Bataan, on Java, on Wake Island, Japanese soldiers enter American and Allied camps and find themselves bewildered by what has been left behind. Entire mess halls stocked with enough food to feed their own company for a month. Warehouses full of spare parts, tires, tools, equipment, some of it barely used, some of it still in factory crates. Medical supplies in quantities they have never seen. Morphine, sulfa drugs, bandages, surgical instruments, a quality their own field hospitals cannot match. A Japanese infantryman named Hiroshi Takahashi, capturing a supply depot in the Philippines, writes in his diary about finding a room filled with nothing but boots. Hundreds of pairs of boots, all new, all identical, stacked in neat rows. He and his comrades have been marching in footwear held together with wire and strips of rubber tire. They have been told that sacrifice and austerity are virtues, that the true warrior needs little, that deprivation sharpens the spirit. And here, abandoned in haste, in a room full of boots the enemy did not even have time to distribute. The implication is staggering, but Takahashi cannot quite allow himself to think it through. Not yet, but the illusion is fragile, and it begins to crack. At Guadalcanal, in August 1942, the education accelerates. The Marines land, and the Japanese High Command expects a brief, vicious fight followed by the inevitable American withdrawal. After all, the Americans have been retreating for 8 months. Why would this be different? But something has changed. The Americans are not retreating. They're digging in. And then the ships come. The Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal have been trained to expect resupply missions to be rare and dangerous affairs. Their own supply lines are tenuous threads stretched across thousands of miles of hostile ocean, vulnerable to submarines and air attack. They are accustomed to scarcity, to making do, to going hungry when the convoys fail to arrive. But the Americans are being supplied as if the ocean itself is vomiting forth an endless stream of material. Ships arrive daily. Landing craft escort trucks, artillery pieces, crates of ammunition, pallets of food. The Marines build a functioning airfield in days. Planes land and take off with a regularity that seems almost casual. Japanese pilots, flying reconnaissance over the island, report what they see to commanders who simply do not believe them. They describe supply dumps covering entire hillsides, rows of vehicles stretching for hundreds of yards, ammunition stockpiles that could sustain a year-long siege. One pilot, returning from strafing run, tells his debriefing officer that he destroyed 20 barrels of aviation fuel and watched the Americans shrug and roll out 20 more as if it were nothing. The officer reprimands him for exaggeration. But it is not exaggeration. It is the simple, devastating truth. On the ground, Japanese soldiers begin to experience something they have never felt before, the suffocating weight of industrial supremacy. They hide in the jungle and watch American soldiers eat meals from cans, hot meals, prepared in field kitchens that seem to materialize overnight. They watch Americans discard equipment that Japanese troops would consider precious, entrenching tools with broken handles, canteens with small dents, ponchos with minor tears. They watch Americans receive mail from home, regular mail, letters and packages that arrive with astonishing consistency despite the fact that this is a jungle island 8,000 miles from California. The logistical sophistication required to deliver a letter from Iowa to Guadalcanal in under 3 weeks is beyond the comprehension of men whose own supply system can barely deliver rice and bullets. And then there are the weapons. The Japanese infantry rifle, the Arisaka Type 99, is a fine weapon, accurate, reliable, well-made. But it is a bolt-action rifle, a design fundamentally unchanged since the turn of the century. The American M1 Garand is semi-automatic. An American rifleman can fire 8 shots as fast as he can pull the trigger, while a Japanese soldier must work his bolt after every round. In a firefight, this difference is apocalyptic. Japanese soldiers describe the sound of American rifle fire as a continuous roar, an unbroken wall of lead that makes advancing suicidal and retreating the only rational choice. They have been taught that the individual warrior, properly trained and motivated, is the ultimate weapon. They are learning that the individual warrior, no matter how brave, cannot overcome an enemy who can shoot 8 times to your once. But it is not just rifles. It is everything. The Americans have mortars in every infantry company. They have artillery in quantities that seem obscene, entire battalions of howitzers where the Japanese have a handful of mountain guns. They have close air support, fighter bombers that arrive within minutes of a radio call, strafing and bombing with a precision and frequency that turns daylight movement into a death sentence. Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal begin to move only at night, cowering in caves and bunkers during the day, terrified of the American planes that circle overhead like hunting birds. They begin to understand that they are not fighting an army. They are fighting an entire industrial civilization that has decided to apply its full attention to their destruction. By late 1942, the cognitive dissonance has become unbearable. Japanese soldiers are still told they are winning. They are told that the Americans are weak, that their will is brittle, that one more decisive battle will break them. But the evidence of their own eyes tells a different story. On New Georgia, on Tarawa, on Saipan, Japanese defenders fight with desperate courage, knowing that they are expected to die in place, that surrender is not an option, that their duty is to kill as many Americans as possible before being killed themselves. And they do. They fight with a ferocity that shocks and impresses their enemies. But they lose. They always lose. A Japanese sergeant named Kenji Nakamura, defending a bunker complex on Poliliu in September 1944, writes a final letter to his family that will be found on his body weeks later. In it, he describes the American bombardment that precedes the infantry assault. For 3 days, the ships fired without stopping. We counted more than 15,000 shells. The coral turned to dust. Men went mad from the noise. When the shelling stopped and the Marines came, we thought surely they would be exhausted, that their attack would be weak. But they were fresh. They had slept on ships. They had eaten hot food. They came in waves, one after another, and when we stopped one wave, another appeared. It is like fighting the ocean. You can kill the water in front of you, but more water always comes. This is the revelation that breaks the Japanese soldiers' understanding of war. The Americans do not fight like an army. They fight like a force of nature. They are not constrained by the limitations that govern normal nations. They do not run out of bullets. They do not run out of men. They do not run out of food. A Japanese battalion, cut off from resupply, knows it has perhaps 2 weeks before starvation forces surrender or death. An American battalion, in the same situation, calls for an airdrop and receives crates of supplies dropped by parachute within hours. Japanese wounded are lucky to receive bandages and sake to dull the pain. American wounded are evacuated by helicopter to hospital ships equipped with X-ray machines, blood plasma, and penicillin, a drug so effective it seems like magic. The symbolic object that comes to represent this impossible abundance is not a weapon or a vehicle. It is a simple thing, the sea ration. The American combat ration, packed in a small cardboard box, contains more calories than a Japanese soldier typically receives in a full day. It includes not just rice or hardtack, but meat, crackers, candy, coffee, cigarettes, toilet paper, and chewing gum. To a Japanese soldier subsisting on a handful of rice and whatever can be foraged from the jungle, the sea ration is an obscenity. It is proof that America does not merely outproduce Japan. It operates on a different plane of existence entirely. Japanese soldiers begin hoarding sea rations taken from dead Americans or captured supply dumps. They trade them like currency. A single sea ration box can buy a week's worth of favors. But more than the trade value, the sea ration becomes a symbol of the unbridgeable gap between the two nations. There is a story, possibly apocryphal, but repeated so often it takes on the weight of truth, of a Japanese officer who opens a captured sea ration and finds, among the other contents, a small packet labeled toilet paper. He stares at it for a long time. Toilet paper. The Americans are including toilet paper in their combat rations. They're giving their frontline soldiers, in the middle of a jungle war, toilet paper as a matter of course. His own men are wiping themselves with leaves. The officer reportedly laughs, a hollow, despairing sound. What kind of nation includes toilet paper in its combat rations? What kind of nation has so much of everything that it can afford such absurd luxuries? And how, he wonders, can we possibly defeat such a nation? By 1944, the question is no longer whether Japan can win. The question is how long Japan can survive. The American submarine campaign has strangled Japanese shipping to the point where the home islands are beginning to starve. The strategic bombing campaign is incinerating Japanese cities one by one. The island-hopping campaign is driving inexorably toward the Japanese mainland, and every island that falls reveals the same pattern. Japanese defenders fight with suicidal courage, inflict heavy casualties, and are eventually annihilated by American firepower. The ratio of losses is often favorable to Japan. 2 Americans dead for every Japanese, sometimes even 1-to-1. But it does not matter. America replaces its losses and comes back stronger. Japan does not. Japanese soldiers captured in the final year of the war, when interrogated, often display a kind of shell-shocked disbelief. They describe fighting not against men, but against machines, against an industrial apparatus so vast and impersonal that individual courage becomes meaningless. One captured naval officer, when shown photographs of American shipyards, photographs of dozens of aircraft carriers under construction simultaneously, of Liberty ships being launched one per day, of bomber factories producing planes by the thousand, breaks down and weeps. He has spent 2 years fighting a war he now understands was lost before it began. But the most profound transformation is not military. It is ideological. The Japanese soldier has been raised in a culture that worships sacrifice, discipline, and spiritual strength. He has been taught that material wealth is corrupting, that luxury breeds weakness, that the true warrior needs nothing but his sword and his spirit. This ideology has been the bedrock of Japanese militarism, the justification for every deprivation, every hardship, every demand for total obedience. And then the Japanese soldier meets America, and the ideology shatters. Because America is not weak. America is the strongest nation on earth. And America is strong precisely because it is wealthy, because it values abundance, because it has built an economy capable of producing more goods than any society in human history. The Japanese soldier begins to understand that he has been lied to, that the virtue of poverty is a lie told by the powerful to keep the powerless compliant, that there is no honor in starvation when the enemy eats 3 meals a day. The cognitive dissonance becomes total. How can the Americans be both soft and invincible? How can they value comfort and still be willing to die by the thousands? How can a nation of individualists, who are supposed to care only for themselves, coordinate a war effort of such breathtaking scale and efficiency? The answer, though few Japanese soldiers have a framework to articulate it, is that they have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of democracy and capitalism. They have been taught that these systems breed selfishness and weakness. What they discover is that these systems breed something far more dangerous: voluntary cooperation on a scale that totalitarianism can only dream of. Americans fight not because they are ordered to, but because they choose to. American factories produce not because they are commanded to, but because they profit from it. The entire American war effort is a vast, decentralized network of millions of individuals making billions of small decisions, all coordinating toward the same goal without needing a divine emperor to direct them. It is, in its way, more totalizing than totalitarianism, because it harnesses human energy more efficiently. By the summer of 1945, Japan is a nation on its knees. The home islands are under blockade. The cities are in ruins. The military is shattered. And still, the government prepares for a final, apocalyptic battle on the home soil, expecting civilians to fight with sharpened bamboo spears against American tanks. It is madness, but it is the only option left when surrender is unthinkable and victory is impossible. And then, on August 6th, the sky above Hiroshima tears open, and the sun falls to earth. The atomic bomb is the final, ultimate expression of everything the Japanese soldier has learned to fear about America. It is not just a weapon. It is a statement. We can unmake creation itself. We can harness the fundamental forces of the universe and turn them into tools of war. You fought us with courage and spirit and discipline, and we fought you with science and industry and endless resources, and now we have become death, the destroyer of worlds. The bomb is not necessary militarily. Japan is already defeated, already starving, already helpless. But it is necessary psychologically. It is the last lesson, the final revelation. America is not just stronger. America is so far beyond you that it can split the atom and erase cities in an instant. When Emperor Hirohito addresses the nation on August 15th, 1945, he speaks of enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. He does not say, "We lost because the Americans were braver or more disciplined." He says, "The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb." It is an acknowledgement, however oblique, of what every Japanese soldier has learned, that this was never a war that could be won with spirit alone. In the years after the war, as Japan rebuilds under American occupation, a strange thing happens. The Japanese people, so recently taught to hate and fear America, begin to admire it. They see American soldiers distributing food to starving children. They see American engineers rebuilding factories and infrastructure. They see American advisors helping to write a new constitution, one that enshrines democracy and human rights. And they see American abundance, the casual wealth, the consumer goods, the automobiles and televisions and washing machines, and they understand, finally, that this is what they were fighting against. Not just an army, but a vision of human possibility. The symbol of American power, in the end, was never the aircraft carrier or the atomic bomb. It was the sea ration. It was the toilet paper. It was the casual assumption that even a frontline soldier, sleeping in a foxhole in the jungle, deserves hot coffee and chocolate and mail from home. It was the idea that prosperity and strength are not opposites, but partners. That a nation can be both wealthy and willing to sacrifice. That comfort and courage can coexist. This was the lesson that shattered the ideology of the Japanese Empire. Not that America was more ruthless, but that America was more human. Decades later, historians and veterans on both sides would look back at the Pacific War and recognize it as a contest between two incompatible philosophies. On one side, a nation that believed strength came from deprivation and obedience, that the individual existed only to serve the state, that spiritual purity could overcome material weakness. On the other side, a nation that believed strength came from freedom and abundance, that the state existed to serve the individual, that material prosperity and moral purpose could coexist. The outcome was never really in doubt. The Japanese soldier, raised on ideology, encountered reality in the form of American industrial power. And reality won. The jungle airfield where Lieutenant Yamamoto stood in January 1942, marveling at the abandoned cans of peaches, was retaken by American forces in March 1943. By then, Yamamoto was dead, killed in a naval bombardment on another island whose name he never learned. But before he died, he wrote a letter to his brother, a letter that was never delivered but was found years later in a waterlogged notebook. In it, he describes a conversation with a captured American pilot. Yamamoto asked the pilot, through a translator, why he fought. The pilot seemed confused by the question. "For my country," he said. "For my family. For my future. Not for the emperor. Not for glory. For his future." Yamamoto wrote, "I do not understand these people. They fight for what they do not yet have, while we fight for what we have always had. And yet they are winning. Perhaps this is the secret. Perhaps the future is stronger than the past." It is as good an epitaph as any for the Japanese Empire, defeated not by a superior warrior spirit, but by a superior vision of what human life could be. The Americans did not win because they were harder or more willing to die. They won because they had built a society capable of producing enough to supply both total war abroad and rising living standards at home. They won because they believed that every individual mattered, that every soldier's life was worth preserving, that victory should not require the starvation of one's own people. They won because they understood that true strength is not the ability to endure suffering, but the ability to eliminate it. The lesson of the Pacific War, learned at hideous cost by millions of Japanese soldiers, is this: ideology cannot defeat real.